Every city has a pulse. You can feel it on the street corners, in the rumble of the subway, in the collective hum of millions of lives intersecting. But what if beneath that familiar rhythm, there's another heartbeat, a darker, more violent pulse that thumps away in the shadows, unheard and unseen by the world above? Tonight, we pull back the curtain on that world. Our story begins with a single, high-stakes police operation, the takedown of a kingpin, the kind of bust that makes headlines and earns commendations. But what they found in that kingpin's lair wasn't just a victory. It was a key that unlocked a door to a hidden reality, revealing a bloody, clandestine war raging in the very heart of the city they had sworn to protect. It's a story about the lines that blur between law and chaos, and the terrifying discovery that the map you trust might not show the real dangers lurking just beneath your feet. Before we descend into the city's secret underworld, if you're a fan of intricate crime stories and deep-diving mysteries, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to ring the bell for notifications, so you never miss an expedition into the unknown. Now, prepare yourselves. We're going in. The air is thick with the promise of a storm, and the first shot is about to be fired. Detective Cale Vance felt the city's pulse in the soles of his worn-out boots. It was a low, angry thrum that vibrated up through the concrete floor of the surveillance van, a rhythm he had come to know intimately over 15 years with the Metro PD's Special Investigations Unit. Tonight, that pulse felt different, tense, a drumbeat building towards a violent crescendo. Outside, the rain fell in relentless, sleeting sheets, washing the neon glow of the city's skyline across the van's tinted windows, distorting the world into a bleeding watercolor of reds and blues. It was the kind of night that washed the streets clean but often brought out the filth from the cracks. For 6 months, Cale's life had been singular in its focus. Ricardo, the architect, Morales. Morales wasn't your typical drug lord. He didn't run a flashy crew or engage in public displays of violence. He was a ghost, a logistician of the highest order. He had built a distribution network for a new, synthetic opioid cocktail known as Chroma that was so efficient, so silent, it operated like a public utility. Chroma flooded the city's veins with terrifying speed, leaving a trail of bodies in its wake, from the penthouses of the financial district to the flophouses in the industrial sector. Morales was called the architect because he didn't just build a drug empire. He designed it flawlessly with interlocking systems of transport, communication, and finance that had proven impossible to crack. Until now, inside the cramped, humming interior of the van, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, damp tactical gear, and the low-level ozone of overheated electronics. Cale was flanked by his team, the only people in the world he trusted without reservation. There was Sergeant Eva Rostova, a former military intelligence analyst whose gift for seeing patterns in chaos was damn near supernatural. Her face, illuminated by the green glow of her 3 monitors, was a mask of intense concentration. Opposite her sat Officer Marcus Herc Hayes, a man built like a vending machine who could breach a reinforced steel door with the same ease most people opened a bag of chips. And in the corner, a younger detective, Ben Carter, whose nervous energy was a tangible thing, his leg bouncing like a piston. Final confirmation from the CI. Eva's voice cut through the tense silence. The shipment is in. Morales is on site. He's overseeing the quarterly count personally. We have a 2-hour window before the product is dispersed. Cale nodded, his eyes fixed on the blueprints of the target location displayed on the central screen. A defunct cannery in the city's old port district, a hulking brick and steel mausoleum left to rot by the tide of modern industry. It was the perfect fortress, isolated, easily defensible, with a labyrinthine interior and access to the old smugglers' tunnels that honeycombed the city's foundations. Alpha and Bravo teams are in position, Herc rumbled, his voice a low bass that seemed to vibrate in Cale's teeth. Ready, on your go. This was it. The culmination of half a year of sleepless nights, dead-end leads, and the ghosts of past failures. One failure in particular stood out in Cale's mind. The Midtown Massacre. A botched raid 2 years ago that had left 3 officers dead and a rival cartel, the Vipers, scattered but not broken. The official inquiry had cleared him, But Kale knew he had underestimated his target, trusted bad intel. He carried the weight of those deaths with him every day. This time there was no room for error. Every piece of intel on Morales had been triple verified, every contingency planned for. "All right," Kale said, his voice steady, betraying none of the cold dread coiling in his gut. "Let's go over it one last time. Alpha Team, Herc, you have the main entrance. No explosive breach unless absolutely necessary. Morales values discretion. I want him to feel secure until we're already on top of him. Bravo Team, you have the waterfront access point. We believe it's the primary escape route. Carter, you're with me and Rostova. We're going in through the roof access. Silent entry. Our priority is Morales and his ledgers. The drugs are secondary." He looked at each of them in turn, the dim light of the van carving their faces out of the darkness. Morales isn't a banger. He's a CEO. He won't go down in a blaze of glory. He'll try to slip away, erase the data, and vanish. We cannot let that happen. This man is the heart of the chroma epidemic. We cut him out tonight, the whole body dies. Check your comms. Standard protocols. Radio silence from this point on. Let's move. The transition from the van's sterile quiet to the storm-lashed reality of the docks was jarring. The wind tore at Kale's jacket, whipping icy rain into his face. The air tasted of salt, diesel, and decay. The cannery loomed before them, a black silhouette against a bruised purple sky, its broken windows like vacant eyes. The only sign of life was a faint, warm light glowing from a few of the grime-caked windows on the third floor. The counting room. Kale, Eva, and Carter moved like shadows, using the stacks of rusting shipping containers for cover. Their ascent to the roof was a silent, vertical dance up a slick, corroded fire escape. Every groan of the metal under their weight sounded like a gunshot in the night's oppressive quiet. On the roof, the wind was a physical force, threatening to peel them from the slick, tarred surface. Eva, a wraith in the darkness, identified the skylight they had marked on the blueprints their entry point. Herc's voice crackled softly in Kale's earpiece. A single word, "Alpha, set." A moment later, another voice, "Bravo, set." Kale took a deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs. He gave Eva a nod. She produced a circular glass cutter and went to work, her movements precise and economical. The faint scratching sound was swallowed by the storm. Carter stood watch, his compact submachine gun held at a low ready, his eyes scanning the surrounding rooftops. The moment the glass was lifted away, the sounds from within the cannery reached them. The low murmur of voices, the clink of metal on concrete, the hum of industrial ventilation. Kale rappelled down first, landing in a silent crouch on a catwalk high above the main cannery floor. He was immediately hit by a strange, chemical-sweet smell, the signature scent of chroma. Below him, the scene was one of quiet, disciplined industry. This wasn't a chaotic drug den. It was a logistics hub. Men in clean overalls moved pallets of neatly bricked packages with forklifts. Others, armed with automatic rifles, stood guard, their postures professional, not like twitchy street muscle. They moved with the quiet efficiency of soldiers. Eva and Carter joined him on the catwalk. Eva pointed to a reinforced door at the far end of the third-floor gantry. The counting room. They moved along the catwalk, their footsteps masked by the noise of the machinery and the storm. As they reached the door, Kale pulled a fiber-optic scope from his pouch, sliding it under the door. The image that filled the small screen was clinical. Ricardo Morales, the architect, stood at the head of a long stainless steel table. He was not what Kale had expected. There were no gold chains, no flashy tattoos. He was a man in his late 50s with neatly trimmed gray hair, wearing a simple, expensive-looking gray suit. He looked like a university professor or a mid-level executive. He held a tablet, checking off figures as his lieutenants weighed and cataloged bricks of a crystalline substance that glowed faintly under the harsh fluorescent lights. "All teams, stand by," Kale whispered into his mic. "Target is visual. On my mark." He counted down from 3 in his head. "Execute." The next 10 seconds were a symphony of controlled violence. Herc's team blew the main doors on the ground floor with a percussive whump that shook the entire building. Simultaneously, Bravo team's assault craft slammed into the waterfront loading bay. Shouts of surprise and alarm erupted from the floor below, followed by the distinctive, deafening crackle of flashbang grenades and the disciplined shouts of "Police! Get down! Get down!" Upstairs, Morales didn't even flinch. He simply turned his head towards the door, his expression one of mild annoyance, like a CEO whose board meeting had been interrupted. He calmly tapped something on his tablet, then slid it into a briefcase. His 2 personal bodyguards, men who looked more like special forces operators than cartel enforcers, drew silenced pistols and moved to cover him. Cale didn't hesitate. Herc's breach was their signal. He kicked the counting room door open, the lock splintering with a sharp crack. He and Carter flooded the room, Eva providing cover from the doorway. "Police! Don't move!" Cale bellowed, his weapon trained on Morales. The bodyguards reacted with unnatural speed, not firing wildly, but moving to shield Morales, their movements economical and precise. Carter fired a controlled burst, stitching a line across the chest of the first guard, who dropped without a sound. The second guard returned fire, the silenced shots making soft fut-fut-fut sounds that were almost lost in the chaos. A round ricocheted off the steel table, close enough for Cale to feel the heat of its passage. Cale squeezed the trigger, a double tap to the guard's center mass. The man staggered, but incredibly, brought his weapon back up. Eva, from the doorway, fired a single, perfect shot. The guard's head snapped back, and he collapsed in a heap. The room was suddenly, shockingly silent, save for the sound of the rain and the distant shouts from the floors below. Morales stood perfectly still, his hands raised in a gesture of placid surrender. The briefcase was at his feet. "Detective Vance, I presume," Morales said, his voice calm, accented, but with a perfect, educated cadence. "I must say your methods are less subtle than I would have expected." "It's over, Ricardo," Cale said, advancing slowly, his weapon still trained on the man's chest. "You have the right to remain silent." "Silence," Morales mused, a faint, condescending smile playing on his lips. "A commodity more valuable than anything in this room." As Herc and his team stormed in to secure the scene, Cale's attention was drawn not to the drugs, not to the money, but to the room itself. It was Spartan, functional, but one wall was covered in what looked like a massive citywide map. But it wasn't a standard city map. It was covered in strange symbols, colored zones, and intersecting lines that meant nothing to him. It looked less like a map of drug distribution routes and more like a strategic battle plan. Eva was already there, her eyes scanning the board with a look of dawning comprehension that chilled Cale to the bone. "Cale," she said, her voice low and urgent, "this isn't a distribution network. These are lines of control. Supply routes, comms relays, dead drops. But they're marked for assets and threats. Look at the symbols." She pointed to a recurring icon, a stylized wolf's head, which was colored red and seemed to denote enemy positions. Another symbol, a simple black circle or coin, was colored green, marking friendly assets. The city was carved up into territories, but not by gangs. The lines were drawn along infrastructure: fiber optic cables, sewer mains, subway lines, shipping lanes. Herc whistled as he cuffed Morales. "What the hell is all this, boss?" Before Cale could answer, Carter called out from a side room. "Sir, you need to see this." The side room was an armory, but it wasn't filled with the usual cartel Glocks and AK-47s. Racked neatly on the walls were military-grade M4S with advanced optics, silenced MP7S, and several Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifles. There were crates of C4 explosives, encrypted communication arrays, and even a few Javelin anti-tank missiles. This was not the arsenal of a drug lord. This was the arsenal of a private army. Cale felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The meticulously planned raid, the culmination of his 6-month obsession, suddenly felt like the first, naive step into a much larger, darker world. He had come here to cut the head off a snake, but the evidence before him suggested he had just stumbled into a nest of dragons. He turned to Morales, who was watching him with that same infuriatingly calm, analytical expression. "What is this, Morales? What's the map? Who are you fighting?" Morales allowed himself another small smile. "Detective, you operate under the misconception that the war on drugs is the only war being fought in this city. You see, you and I, we are merely middle management." He looked past Kale at the map on the wall. "You haven't taken a king off the board. You've simply captured a pawn, and in doing so, you have unknowingly announced your own entry into the game. And I assure you, it is a game you are not equipped to play." His words hung in the air, heavy with a meaning that Kale couldn't yet grasp but could feel in his bones. The sounds of his team clearing the building, the shouts of "all clear," the crackle of radio sit all seemed to fade into the background. His victory, the biggest of his career, now felt hollow, insignificant, felt like a prelude. Morales wasn't the architect of a drug empire. He was the architect of something far more complex, and Kale had just kicked the door down to his workshop, revealing a blueprint for a war he never knew existed. The bloody underground heart of the city had just been exposed, and its first, terrifying beat was echoing in the silence of the captured counting room. The 24 hours following the raid were a blur of procedural bureaucracy and hollow congratulations. The headlines screamed victory: drug kingpin, the architect, toppled, Chroma syndicate shattered. The mayor held a press conference. The police commissioner praised the special investigations unit's unparalleled courage and dedication. Kale stood at the back of the press hall, the flashes of cameras feeling like small explosions, and felt a profound sense of dislocation. They were celebrating the end of a chapter, while he was staring at the terrifying first page of a whole new book. Back at the precinct, in the windowless, fluorescent-lit basement room that served as the SIU's nerve center, the spoils of their victory were laid out. The drugs and the money were already in evidence lockup, irrelevant distractions. The real prize was the contents of Morales' counting room, the massive, coded map, several encrypted hard drives, and the briefcase Morales had been so calm about, which contained a single, heavily encrypted satellite phone. Eva Rostova was in her element. For 2 days straight, she barely slept, fueled by a relentless intensity and an endless supply of black coffee. The map was her primary focus. She had it photographed and digitized, and was now cross-referencing its cryptic symbols with every database she could access. Municipal records, infrastructure schematics, known gang territories, financial districts. "It's not random," she muttered, more to herself than to Kale, who was watching over her shoulder. "There's a logic to it, a terrifying logic." She pointed to the screen, where she had overlaid the map's lines onto a schematic of the city's power grid. "Look, the friendly assets, the black coins, are clustered around major power substations, communication hubs, and water treatment plants. They aren't controlling street corners for drug sales. They're controlling the city's arteries." "And the wolves?" Kale asked, referring to the red wolf's head symbol that marked the enemy. "The wolves are different," Eva said, her brow furrowed. "Their territories are more fluid, more aggressive. They seem to be focused on disruption. They're positioned along major transport routes, highways, railways, port access points. It's a classic insurgency pattern. One side is holding territory, controlling infrastructure. The other is dedicated to sabotage, to breaking supply lines. This isn't a turf war, Kale. This is a strategic conflict. A siege." While Eva deciphered the battlefield, Kale focused on the man they had captured. Ricardo Morales was in a high-security holding cell at a federal facility, refusing to speak to anyone but Kale. Their first interrogation session was a sterile, frustrating affair. Morales sat opposite Kale, his prison-issue jumpsuit looking as out of place on him as a tuxedo on a scarecrow. He was calm, articulate, and utterly impenetrable. "Your Chroma operation," Kale began, sliding photos of overdose victims across the steel table. "It was just a funding mechanism, wasn't it? A way to finance your side of this war." Morales glanced at the photos with detached disinterest. "Everything is a funding mechanism, detective. Your salary is funded by taxes. Taxes are funded by commerce. Commerce is funded by the illusion of stability. All I did was monetize instability. Chroma was simply a product that serviced a pre-existing demand. A very profitable one. Who do you work for? Kale pressed. The Black Coins. What's the name of your organization? Morales smiled faintly. An organization is a body. Can be wounded, dissected, killed. A principle, however, is far more resilient. We believe in order, detective, stability, the kind of stability that can only be achieved through absolute control. The city is a machine, and a machine requires a single, competent operator to function efficiently. We are the operators. And the wolves. At the mention of the wolves, Morales's placid demeanor cracked for the first time. A flicker of genuine venom crossed his face. Chaos, he spat, the word a curse. Anarchists, primitives who believe that progress comes from burning everything to the ground. They are a disease, a plague that must be eradicated for the health of the host. He would say no more. The interrogation was over. Kale left with a name for Morales's side, the operators, or something like it, and a chilling affirmation of his fears. Morales wasn't a criminal mastermind in the traditional sense. He was a bureaucrat, a high-level manager in a shadow government vying for control of the city. The hard drives from the cannery were a fortress of military-grade encryption. It took a favor from a contact Eva had in the NSA to even begin to crack them. When the first files were finally decrypted, they weren't financial ledgers. They were personnel files. Dozens of them. Each file contained a photo and a detailed dossier on an individual. There were former Special Forces soldiers, disgraced intelligence analysts, brilliant but blacklisted engineers, and even a few high-level corporate executives who had mysteriously dropped off the grid. These were the Black Coin assets. Morales was not just managing drugs. He was managing a private army of highly skilled, deniable operatives. Herc and Carter, meanwhile, were tasked with tracing the weapons from the armory. The serial numbers were all ghosted, but Herc, using an old-school contact at the ATF, managed to trace a manufacturing lot number from one of the Javelin missiles. The trail led to a U.S. military shipment that had officially been lost in transit during a transfer from a base in Afghanistan 3 years prior. "This is way above our pay grade, Kale," Herc said, his usual booming confidence replaced by a somber concern. "These aren't cartel weapons. This is state-level hardware. Whoever these operators are, they're funded and supplied like a small nation." The sense of being out of their depth was growing, a cold tide rising around them. The victory that the department was still celebrating felt more and more like a catastrophic blunder. They hadn't just arrested a drug lord. They had effectively declared war on a clandestine power they didn't understand. The first sign of retaliation was subtle. Kale's confidential informant, the one whose tip had confirmed Morales's location, was found dead in his apartment. The official cause of death was a heroin overdose, a tragic but common end for a low-level CI. But Kale knew better. The CI was terrified of needles. The scene was too clean, too perfect. It was a message. Cleanup operation. The second sign was less subtle. Kale and Eva were driving back from the federal detention center when a black, nondescript sedan began tailing them. It was professional, almost impossible to spot, but Eva, with her training, picked it up after 3 blocks. Kale took a series of evasive turns, but the sedan stuck to them like glue. "They're not trying to hide anymore," Eva said, her voice tight, her eyes on the side mirror. "They're boxing us in." A large construction truck suddenly pulled out from a side street ahead, blocking the road. The sedan behind them accelerated, closing the distance. It was a classic pincer move. "Hold on," Kale grunted, yanking the wheel hard to the right, jumping the curb and plowing onto the sidewalk, sending pedestrians scattering. He sped down the sidewalk for half a block before swerving back into traffic, the sedan in hot pursuit. He weaved through the congested downtown streets, his police-issue Crown Victoria no match for the speed and agility of the tuned sedan. "They're hurting us," Eva realized, looking at the GPS. "They're pushing us toward the industrial sector. Fewer witnesses." Kale saw an opening and took it, turning sharply into a multi-story parking garage. He sped up the spiraling ramps, tires squealing in protest, the sedan right behind them. He reached the open-air top level and slammed on the brakes, skidding the car into a 180-degree turn to face their pursuers. The black sedan screeched to a halt 20 yards away. Two men in dark tactical gear, faces obscured by balaclavas, exited the vehicle, raising silenced submachine guns. They moved with the same fluid, professional efficiency as Morales' bodyguards. These were black coin assets. Kale and Eva were already out of their car, using the engine block for cover. "They don't want to kill us," Kale said, his heart pounding against his ribs. "Not here. They want the sat phone. They want the data. They're about to be disappointed," Eva replied grimly, her service pistol held in a steady, two-handed grip. The firefight was short and brutal. The attackers were clearly superior in terms of firepower and training, but Kale and Eva were on their home turf and they were desperate. The air was filled with the soft cough of silenced weapons and the sharp crack of their own unsuppressed handguns. Concrete chips flew from the pillars around them. Kale managed to hit one of the men in the leg, sending him to the ground. Eva, providing covering fire, gave Kale the opening he needed. He sprinted to a new position, flanking them. The remaining attacker, realizing his position was compromised, made a split-second decision. He threw a smoke grenade, and under the cover of the thick, acrid smoke, he and his wounded partner retreated back to their car and sped away. By the time the smoke cleared, they were gone. Sirens wailed in the distance, a response to the civilian calls about a car chase. Kale and Eva stood there, breathing heavily, the smell of gunpowder sharp in the cold air. They were alive, but the message was clear. "We can get to you anytime, anywhere. Stop digging." The incident was officially buried. Their captain, a political animal named Walsh, called it a road rage incident with unknown perpetrators. He ordered them to hand over all the evidence from the Morales raid: the map, the drives, the finito, a special joint task force from Washington that was supposedly taking over the case. "You guys did good work, Kale," Walsh said, avoiding his eyes. "You took down a major player. Let the feds handle the fallout. Sayu is moving on to a new case. The Viper cartel is getting bold again." Kale knew a stonewall when he saw one. There was no task force. The evidence was being buried. Someone high up had been compromised, or was terrified of what they had uncovered. They were being shut down, warned off. That night, in Eva's apartment, which she had already swept for bugs twice, the team met in secret. The atmosphere was thick with paranoia and defiance. "They're trying to erase it," Carter said, his youthful face pale. "They want us to pretend none of this happened. Handing over that evidence is a death sentence for this investigation," Herc added, his big hands clenched into fists. "And maybe for us." Kale looked at Eva. "Did you?" he asked. Eva slid a small, metallic object across her coffee table. "A cloned hard drive. I made a full decrypted copy of everything before handing over the originals," she said with a grim smile. "My old habits from Langley. Never give up your only leverage." It was a mutinous, career-ending decision. But it was the only one they had. They were on their own now. The department couldn't be trusted. The feds were either complicit or compromised. They were a rogue unit with a single, cloned hard drive containing a blueprint for a secret war. "Morales said we announced our entry into the game," Kale said, picking up the drive. "He was right. But if we're going to play, we're not going to be pawns." He looked at the faces of his team, the only people he could trust. "We need to understand the enemy. Not just the operators, but the wolves, too. We need to find out who they are and what they're fighting for. We're going off the books. No warrants, no backup. Just us. Anyone who wants out. Now's the time." No one moved. The silence in the room was its own answer. They were in this together, for better or for worse. Their official investigation was over, but their real one had just begun. They were about to willingly step off the map of their own city and into the bloody, uncharted territory of the war that was raging just beneath its surface. Going off the books was like stepping into a different city, one that existed in the same physical space but operated by a completely different set of rules. The familiar safety nets of backup, warrants, and institutional authority were gone. Now, every alley was a potential ambush, every new face a potential threat. Kale's team, once a scalpel of the justice system, was now a clandestine cell operating in the shadows of the very system they had sworn to uphold. Their only guide was the data on Eva's cloned hard drive, a ghost image of a war they were only beginning to comprehend. Their new headquarters was the dusty, forgotten basement of a boxing gym Herc owned in a rough part of town. The smell of old leather and sweat replaced the sterile scent of the precinct. A new map of the city went up on the wall, but this time, they were the ones adding the cryptic symbols, piecing together the battle lines from the decrypted data. The hard drive was a treasure trove of terror. It contained not just personnel files, but operational plans, financial transactions routed through a dizzying maze of shell corporations and cryptocurrencies, and, most chillingly, surveillance logs. The operators, true to their name, had eyes and ears everywhere. They had infiltrated municipal services, labor unions, and corporate boards. They had assets inside the police department. The reason Captain Walsh had shut them down so quickly became terrifyingly clear. They weren't just a private army. They were a shadow state, a corporate entity seeking a hostile takeover of the city itself. Their goal was control, pure and simple. But to understand the war, they needed to understand both sides. If the operators were the forces of a cold, corporate tyranny, who were the wolves? The data on them was sparse, labeled only as the jackals. They were classified as hostiles, insurgents, terrorists. The files detailed their attacks. Bombings of fiber optic junctions, assassinations of corporate lobbyists, armed robberies of trucks carrying components for the city's new, smart grid infrastructure. They were violent, chaotic, and brutally effective. But their motives remained a mystery. They're not just anarchists, Eva argued, tracing their attack patterns on the digital map. There's a method here. They're not hitting civilians. They're hitting the infrastructure the operators are trying to control. It's targeted, surgical in its own brutal way. They're trying to bleed the operators, to make the cost of control too high. To find the jackals, they needed to descend into the city's true underworld. Kale decided to start with the only other major criminal power they knew. The remnants of the Viper cartel, the very group he was supposed to be investigating now. The Vipers were old-school narcos, and the rise of Morales's Chroma operation had decimated their business. They were a wounded animal, and wounded animals were either dangerous or desperate. Kale was betting on the latter. He arranged a meeting through a chain of paranoid cutouts, finally ending up in the back of a refrigerated meat truck with the Viper's new de facto leader, a man named Ghost. Ghost was wiry, twitchy, and his eyes held the haunted look of a man who knew his time was running out. The architect, Ghost hissed, his breath fogging in the cold air. He wasn't a dealer. He was a plague. His people, they move like ghosts. They don't talk, they don't negotiate. They just erase you. We lost half our territory in 6 months. Not in shootouts. Guys just disappear. Shipments vanish. Money gets frozen. It's like fighting a corporation, not a gang. We know, Kale said. We're fighting them too. We need to know about the other side. The ones who hit them. The jackals. Ghost laughed. A harsh, humorless sound. The jackals? Man, you're either crazy brave or crazy stupid. The jackals are worse. The architects' people, they want your business. The jackals, they want your soul. They're zealots. They show up, they tell you the city is a machine and you're a broken cog. They say you can either help them break it or be ground to dust. They're not after money. They're after converts. He told them about a place, a recruitment spot, a derelict subway station abandoned for decades, that the jackals used as a sort of public forum for the disenfranchised, the gangbangers, the hackers, the ex-military misfits chewed up and spat out by the system. It was their church, their stronghold. Going in there was suicide for a cop. But Kale's team weren't cops anymore. Not really. They went in unarmed, a sign of trust or perhaps of foolishness. The station was a cavern deep beneath the city, accessible only through a series of maintenance tunnels. The air was cool and damp, and the only light came from jury-rigged floodlights powered by a humming generator. The platform was filled with a strange congregation of the city's lost souls. And at the center of them, speaking from atop an overturned train car, was a woman. She was tall, with a shaved head and a face covered in faded, intricate tattoos. She spoke with a fiery, charismatic passion that commanded the attention of everyone present. She spoke of the invisible cage being built around them, of the corporate operators, who saw people not as citizens, but as data points to be managed and monetized. She spoke of a war for the soul of the city. When she was finished, Kale approached her. He expected hostility, suspicion. Instead, her eyes, a piercing, intelligent gray, showed a flicker of recognition. "Detective Kalen Vance," she said. Her voice was lower now, a gravelly calm. "The man who captured the architect. I wondered when you would stop looking at the map and start looking for the players. My name is Nix." Nix was the leader of the Jackals. Over a tense conversation in a candlelit maintenance room, she laid out her side of the war. The Jackals were not anarchists. They were liberators, or so they believed. Many of them were former employees, victims, or cast-offs of the massive corporate conglomerate that Kale's team had learned was behind the operators. A global private security and technology firm called the Aegis Consortium. Aegis isn't just trying to control this city, Nix explained. This city is their beta test. They are building the perfect model for urban control. They manage the power, the water, the communications, the logistics. And once they have the body, they capture the soul. Morales's chroma wasn't just for funding. It was a pacification tool. A way to sedate the population, to quell dissent before it even begins. We are not terrorists. We are the immune system's response. Kale was now standing on the front line of a war he never knew existed, with a clear view of both armies. On one side, Aegis and their operators, a force of cold, clinical, corporate totalitarianism, offering stability at the cost of freedom. On the other, Nix and her Jackals, a band of violent, radical idealists, fighting for freedom with the tools of terror. He and his team were caught in the crossfire, a third, unaligned party with no allies. The choice of what to do next was ripped from their hands. While Kale was meeting with Nix, Aegis made its move. Morales, ever the calm bureaucrat, must have decided his usefulness in custody had expired. He had a heart attack in his cell. He was a loose end, neatly tied up. At the same time, a new, far more brutal commander must have taken his place. The operators launched a full-scale purge. It began with a series of coordinated, lightning-fast strikes. They hit the Viper cartel's remaining safe houses, wiping them out not with arrests, but with brutal military-style assassinations. Ghost was found in the meat truck, riddled with bullets. Then they came for the SIU. Not for Kale's team, who were already ghosts, but for their digital footprint. A server malfunction at the precinct wiped out years of SIU case files, including all of their old research on Morales. Captain Walsh, their compromised superior, was killed in a hit-and-run accident. Aegis was scrubbing the board clean, erasing any evidence that the Morales investigation had ever led anywhere but to a dead end. The final target was the Jackals. Eva, monitoring Aegis's encrypted communications from the data they had, picked up the chatter. They're moving on Nix's location. A full tactical assault. They're not just taking it down. They're sanitizing it. No survivors. This was the tipping point. Kale looked at his team in the dim light of the basement. They could run, disappear, take the knowledge they had and live as fugitives. Or they could intervene. They couldn't side with Aegis, the force that had tried to kill them and was strangling their city. And they couldn't fully condone the Jackal's violent methods. But in that moment, one thing was clear. Aegis was the immediate existential threat. The Jackals, for all their faults, were fighting for a cause Kale could understand, even if he couldn't approve of their methods. Aegis wants to erase this war from history, Kale said, his voice hard. If they succeed tonight, no one will ever know the truth. They'll win, and the city will be lost. So what's the play? Herc asked, already checking the action on his shotgun. We can't fight Aegis head-on, Eva said. her fingers flying across her keyboard. But we can tip the scales. The Jackals know the terrain, but Aegis has superior tech and hardware. Their command and control is centralized. If we can disrupt it, we can give Nyx and her people a fighting chance. Their plan was desperate and borderline suicidal. While the main operator force descended on the abandoned subway station, Kale and Herc would create a diversion, hitting a key Aegis communications node they had identified from the hard drive. Meanwhile, Eva and Carter would try to feed Nyx's people real-time tactical data by hacking into the operator's battle network. They weren't joining the Jackals. They were becoming a chaotic third element, an unforeseen variable in Aegis's perfect equation. The battle for the soul of the city was fought not in the streets, but in the tunnels and server rooms beneath them. Kale and Herc, using C4 procured from Herc's old EOD contact, blew the communications node in a fiery eruption that blacked out Aegis's comms in a 5-block radius at the critical moment of their assault. The operators, suddenly blind and deaf, were thrown into chaos. In the subway station, the battle was brutal. The operators, even without comms, were a relentless force. But with Eva's intel feeding them enemy positions and Herc's diversion sowing confusion, the Jackals were able to mount a fierce, effective defense. It was a bloody, chaotic melee in the dark tunnels, a desperate struggle for survival. Kale and his team extracted themselves in the chaos, a police scanner crackling with reports of an underground gas main explosion and gang-related gunfire. The official story was already being written. In the gray light of dawn, Kale met Nyx one last time at a prearranged spot. Her face was grim, smudged with dirt and smoke. "You saved us," she said, her usual fire banked to a low coal. "Many of us, but not all. They'll be back. Stronger." "We know," Kale said. "We didn't do it for you. We did it for the city. We're not your soldiers." "No," Nyx agreed, a flicker of respect in her eyes. "You're something else. A ghost in their machine. They don't know who you are or what you can do. That makes you more dangerous than any army." She and her remaining fighters melted back into the shadows, back into the city's hidden veins. Kale returned to the gym basement to find his team. They were exhausted, bruised, but alive. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. They had succeeded in preventing Aegis from winning a decisive victory, but in doing so, they had revealed their hand. Aegis now knew there was a third, highly capable player on the board. The operators would now be hunting them with the full, terrifying force of their resources. The city above them was waking up. People were heading to work, buying coffee, living their lives, completely oblivious to the bloody war that had been fought for their future while they slept. The takedown of the architect hadn't ended a threat. It had been an invitation to a war that had no clear enemy, no clear ally, and no clear end. Kale Vance and his rogue team were now the city's only true watchmen, guarding a secret front line in a battle for its very soul. And as the city's familiar pulse began to beat around them, they could hear the other one, the darker one, beating louder than ever before.